Merry Christmas all. It's Christmas Eve, and as 'tis the season, I thought I would share with you all a ghost story. This is a ghost story from Somerset, the county in which I grew up, and I found this in a Somerset Christmas compiled by John Chandler, Tales of My Fathers, and indeed I did nick this book off my dad. So this originally appeared in G.F. Munford's Ghosts and Legends of South Somerset. It's called The Old Man's Christmas Story. This is actually originally a tale within a tale in the original book, but here they cut straight to the chase and get straight to the old man's story. I'm going to do it in the original accent as well because Christmas. I draw round the fire, and I will tell you the tale once more. I always think of it at Christmas time, and at the very sight of a snowflake, that night's adventure rushes into my memory and makes me shudder. I forget the year now, but it was during that remarkable winter when there were 20 foot of snow upon the ground, when the tops of the trees were the only traces of vegetation, when the hedges were totally covered with the purest of white mantles, and no guide was left for the traveller but his own untutored instinct. There never could be a brighter moonlit night, and when I set out on my journey from Chard to Crewkerne, about 10 o'clock, the moon, which were nearly full, shone with such lustre upon the snow that the pure, soft, silvery light flung a kind of enchanted halo over the earth. If only for the scenery, my memory of that night will never fade. Fear, I knew not what it meant, and cared little for the ghosts and hobgoblins which are known to haunt that road, for to tell the truth, I did not believe in them then. I was well wrapped up, and with a stout stick as my only companion, I started with a light heart across the unbeaten desert of snow which lay before me, walking as straight as I could in the direction in which I knew Crewkerne lay. For the first 3 or 4 miles I was confident of my own sagacity, but after walking for about an hour and a half, having seen no trace of a house, not even Wind Whistle Inn, which I fully expected to pass, I began to fancy that I had taken the wrong course. I was getting terribly tired, for it was hard work to wade through the snow, and my heart began to beat as fast as I thought of the probability of being lost and of the horror of death from cold and hunger. All the courage I had at starting evaporated. I was fairly unmanned, and I stood still in that bleak, snowy desert, not knowing which way to steer, and almost cried. I thought of my home and of the comforts which I knew awaited me there, and cursed my foolhardiness for venturing across the pathless waste. The owls, who could find no resting place except on the tops of the tallest trees, were loud in their midnight revels, and kept up a continual twitch-a-woo, as if in mockery of my perplexity. Whilst my thoughts were racked with the dilemma, I was considering whether I should turn to the right or left, or whether I should keep in the way I was going, or retrace my steps. I saw, far off in the pale moonlight, what appeared to be the chimney of a cottage, and hastily made my way thither, with the view of ascertaining the direction I ought to take for Crewkerne. It was a cottage, and what was more, it was inhabited. But it was literally snowed in. The only means of going in or coming out of the house was through the bedroom window, and at that I rattled violently to arouse the occupants of the room. It was some time before I received my answer, although I plainly heard the rough voice of a man, the tremulous notes of a woman, and the plaintive whispers of several children, all of whom were evidently in a state of great alarm. Thinking that my intrusion had been the cause thereof, I shouted, asking for 2 or 3 hours' shelter, and telling them that I had lost my way. The rough voice was in favour of admitting me, but I heard the woman say, in an earnest tone, "For God's sake, Robert, don't think of such a thing. It's that dreadful smuggler's ghost again. Oh, we will leave this terrible place." And then she burst out crying. "Nonsense," replied her stern companion. "Ghosts can't talk. 'Tis a poor traveller who's lost his way. Let's pull up the curtain and open the window, and if it's anybody who means any harm, he shall soon feel the contents of this pistol." He was, I suppose, about to open the window, but the entreaties of his wife and the screams of his children, all of whom declared it was the smuggler's ghost, prevented him from doing so. "Well, if you won't give me shelter," I said, "will you do me the favour to tell me the direction I must take for Crewkerne?" "Keep a little to your left and follow straight on," replied Robert. "You will then come to Coombe Farm, when you'll know where you are." "Yes, if I ever get there. But where am I now?" "At Pertington. Keep to your left and you'll make no mistake. Good night." "Good night," I growled, surlily enough, you may depend upon it, for I thought them unnaturally inhospitable. I followed in the direction I was told without the slightest hope of ever finding my way, and wondering deeply what on earth the people could have meant by their strange behaviour and by their allusion to the smuggler's ghost. "Chwitch woo!" rejoiced the owls as I again plodded mechanically on. My limbs were stiff with cold, and I felt dreadfully afraid that I should fall across the ghost to which those nervous people had alluded. Snow everywhere, except up there, where the moon and stars looked down upon me in silent majesty. So overwhelming was the scene that I believe I should have swooned and dreamed of being in fairyland but for the hideous screaming of the owls. In the midst of the dismal chorus, a fearful, heart-rending scream burst upon my ears, a long, agonising shriek, too wild for human utterance. It began in the distance, travelled with the chilly night air across my path, hung among the far-off hills, came back again, and ultimately died into a groaning wail. Whilst I stood paralysed with fear, a riderless horse, saddled and bridled, plunged out from among the tops of Blackmore copse on my right and dashed at full speed towards the spot on which I was riveted. Another horse, but with a rider on its back, urging it at full speed, came close behind, and yet a third, also with a rider, plunging recklessly after the second. I was not alone then, but I prayed for my solitariness to return. Oh, 'tis too horrible to tell. The first horse, as if mad with fright, ran close to me and snorted a deathly dampness and dashed on and on and on. I saw it no more. The second horse was ridden by a grim, surly-looking fellow with a pistol in his belt and a dagger by his side. He had on a slouched hat and pulled it over his eyes as if to hide his face, but the diabolical leer in his countenance could not be hidden with 1,000 coverings. Oh, how he urged his horse and kept looking behind him as if fearful that his pursuer would overtake him. And what a sense of strangling suffocation was flung over me as the fiendish form glided close to my side. I could not move, try how I would. The third whistled past me with the same haste, and he, I saw, was dressed in the uniform of a coastguard. His hand eagerly gripped a pistol, and his face bore a wild and excited look I shall never forget, but not half so fiendish as the other. The first horse took a circular direction, as if uncertain which way to go. On and on they plunged, the pace increased, and they were both coming towards me again. I fell upon my knees, I could not help it, and the owls laughed with joy. A strange thing was that the horses made no noise. The trampling of the animals could not be expected to sound among the soft snow, but there was no jingling of rein or stirrup, and neither rider uttered a word, yet their looks betrayed a fearful meaning. On and on the pursued horseman urged his steed at the rate of an express train, and was bearing towards me at a frightful pace. But his pursuer gradually gained, and just as the grim-looking rider came close to me, crouched, trembling amongst the snow, the pistol of the coastguard flashed its fatal messenger, and put forever a stop to the speed of the horse he was pursuing. In an instant, in the twinkling of an eye, the rider leaped upon his feet, drew his pistol, and shot the horse of the coastguardsman dead. Another mysterious thing was that the pistol made no reports, but the long forked tongues of fire were plain enough, God knows. I thought it must be a horrible dream, and mechanically moved my arms as if to wrap myself in the bedclothes. There was another moment's lull in which both of the riders confronted each other with savage looks, each holding a dagger in his hand in readiness to strike a blow. Oh, what a deathly atmosphere surrounded me! All my imaginary bedclothes failed to keep it off, and the moon shone on those lifeless horses and on those diabolical human forms, but no shadow was cast, no noise was heard, except the dismal chanting of the owls. Am I going mad, I thought, or is it a frightful nightmare? For I could not rise from my crouching position, although I saw those two men within a few yards of me, engaged in a deadly struggle. They closed. The one with the slouched hat then got the better of his antagonist, and with a horrible leer of fiendish triumph, struck the dagger violently into his bosom. There was another wild, agonising cry, which echoed and re-echoed along the snowy expanse, and which must have startled every living thing for miles, the owls again laughing their unearthly laugh of exultation. The murderer wiped his dagger upon the ground, leaving a long red track, and hurriedly glided away, taking no notice of me, the unwilling witness of the foul deed. All was done in much less time than I can tell it, but it seemed an age to me, and I was so petrified with fear I thought I should have turned into a stone. After the murderer departed, I felt much relieved, and the power of which I seemed deprived returned. So I rose to my feet and went to the murdered man, thinking that I should perhaps be of some service to him, but from what I have heard since, I was nearly 50 years too late. I stopped and endeavoured to take hold of the arm that was stretched out upon the snow, but, good God, I found I grasped at nothing. There was the form, stark and motionless, the rigid features in the horrible contortion, as if writhing in agony. There was the blood oozing out of the wound and making a dark trail along the pure white snow. And there were the two horses lying lifeless at its feet. And I then became aware that what I had seen was only a phantom tragedy. Chwit chawoo, laughed the owls again, and the keen frosty air became full of such fiendish yells as pierced my very soul. All around me and in the distance there were such loud and discordant noises as if the orchestra of hell had been let loose. I could endure the scene no longer. My nerves were completely unstrung, and I swooned by the side of those livid phantom corpses on a desert of snow, with an uninterrupted chorus of owl music as a dismal lullaby. It must have been some time before I rallied, for when I awoke, the day was beginning to break, and I was so benumbed and stupefied with cold that I had hardly had the power to move. My brain was in a whirl. I looked around, but could see no evidence of a struggle. No corpses were there then, and no tracks upon the snow were discernible, except those I had made myself. I then found that I was in Coombe Farm Valley, when I made my way home as fast as the weakened state I was in would allow me. The story's not quite finished. I naturally fell ill and was seized with a fever brought on by the exposure and fright, and I was ill for many weeks. When I first told my adventure, it was thought to be the invention of a disordered brain. But as soon as I was well enough, by which time the snow had disappeared, I found the people who lived at the cottage to which I had applied for shelter. Robert remembered my calling perfectly well and told me that not long afterwards, on that very night, 3 horsemen passed his cottage in full chase. "They were the ghosts of 3 men who often ride by this way in the middle of wintry nights," said he. "The first always stops opposite my house and hastily motions as if to ask for shelter. Immediately afterwards, 2 others come on at full gallop, and all 3 bound off across the country. They do say that they're the ghosts of 2 coastguardsmen and a smuggler who murdered them about 50 or 60 years ago. But about that I know nothing. All I know is that they often chase each other across the valley, and the reason I did not let you in was because my wife and children were afraid that you were the ghost of the smuggler, seeking for shelter." I told him what I had seen, and he assured me that the tragedy had often been witnessed exactly as I have described it. Merry Christmas and have a Happy New Year.